NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
The Supreme Court seemed to side with Starbucks during oral arguments Tuesday. At issue, whether a lower court made a mistake in forcing Starbucks to rehire union organizing employees. Starbucks had fired the Memphis Seven, who invited a TV crew into a store to promote their unionization efforts. The National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB, then successfully convinced the lower court to force Starbucks to rehire them.
Why would the board get deference when the board doesn't deserve any deference and has no expertise on how equity should be weighed?
Attorney Lisa Blatt, arguing on behalf of Starbucks, says forcing Starbucks to do something is extraordinary and drastic. She believes the NLRB made an inappropriate request in this instance. If the NLRB wins, it'll be easier for them to intervene in similar cases. It may have more power over other companies. Justice Neil Gorsuch says that NLRB is not following the same standard other organizations follow.
In all sorts of alphabet soup agencies, we don't do this. The district courts apply the likelihood of success test as we normally conceive it. So why is this particular statutory regime different than so many others?
He suggests the NLRB shouldn't be an exception. If Starbucks wins the case, it'll be harder for the NLRB to help employees who want to unionize. After the arguments, the justices will deliberate and issue a final decision in the coming months. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Coming up, 24 people are arrested in a child sexting operation in California. The suspects include people in positions of public trust. And in the NBA playoffs, after a pair of thrilling finishes yesterday, the officiating has been the talk of the day. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we come back. Arrest of 24 individuals, including a San Jose fire captain. Operation Spring Cleaning was spearheaded by the Sacramento County Sheriff's Office and is part of a nationwide program targeting internet crimes against children. NTD's Jason Blair has more, and a warning: this report contains subject matter and language some viewers may find disturbing.
A 3-day operation involving 100 officers led to the arrest of 24 suspected child sex predators.
Because these predators are out there preying on our children.
Some of these guys are really righteous pedophiles that will hunt people.
Sheriff Cooper said among the arrests include several people in positions of public trust.
We arrested a San Jose firefighter who lives here in Sacramento, a Sunday school teacher, a United States Postal Service worker.
San Jose Fire Captain Spencer Parker was arrested during the operation. He has since resigned and is scheduled to be in court Wednesday morning. Sheriff Cooper said that during the operation, undercover detectives posed as children 13 years or younger on various social media platforms.
Suspects often directed these kids to commit sexual acts and/or ask for pornographic material. Some of the suspects would send pornographic material to our undercover officers.
Cooper said that many of them arranged to meet with who they believed to be children for sexual contact, leading to arrests. He also said there was no pattern of any specific age group, social, or economic background with the suspects. They ranged from their 20s to 70 years old.
I don't care how smart or how sophisticated you think your son or daughter is. An adult can manipulate a child. Bottom line, period.
The sheriff urged parents to know what their kids are doing online.
Parents on your children's phones or social media platforms, you are the parent. It is not a democracy. You have to take charge. And think about this. This was 3 days. This stuff goes on 24/7, 365.
Some of the charges for the 24 suspects include contacting a minor with intent for sex, arranging to meet with a minor for sex, and the attempt lewd acts with a child under the age of 14. Jason Blair, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin at the Sports Hub.
How it relates to a certain presidential pooch. Now, I know what you're thinking. What does a dog have to do with the country's well-being? As it turns out, quite a bit. Let's start with the obvious. It's President Biden's dog, Major, and he's been making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Biting Secret Service agents, White House staff at least 20 times. The canine is causing quite the stir, but they're coming to take him away. But let's not blame the dog. After all, it's not his fault. He just lacks the discipline, training. The real issue lies with the owner. In this case, El Presidente. What does this have to do with the country? I'm glad you asked. The country is going to the dogs, if you haven't noticed. And just like a dog that lacks training and discipline, a nation with no strong leadership can quickly descend into absolute chaos. And that's what we see in the U.S. today. People lashing out, biting the hands that feed them, or the hands that at least try to protect their own rights. Instead of promoting unity and tolerance, we're seeing a rise in division and fear-mongering. The administration and the ruling class pander to the negative base emotions of the populace, exacerbating the problems and eviscerating the precepts of peace and understanding. Surely they know that. The media plays a significant role. Instead of presenting facts and allowing the public to form their own opinions, they've chosen to collectively push a prescribed narrative that seems to serve to further divide. Major walks in front of Biden, so who's in charge there? But he's not alone. Dogs seem to be leading the pack. They're the only reason some people leave the house or even socialize anymore. We need to hold those collecting checks from the state accountable for their actions and ensure that they're working on behalf of Americans. Recognize we're all in this together, and that our differences are what makes this country great. And if this puppy goes down, we all do. Yes, it's a boring and dirty business to clean up the poop, but it has to be done. With real leadership, greater transparency, a little bit of discipline, we can stop the country from completely going to the dogs, I believe. Let's demand better from our leadership, or better leaders who promote a focus on the issues so we can try for a treat, a United States that remains intact and a great place to live. Thanks for watching. And remember, Snickerdoodle, keep your nose clean.
And we take seriously. Imagine a coffee
that have done similar protests in the United States previously are now behind the pro-Gaza protests. And I want to show you the evidence of all of this, show you the CCP ties, show you the Marxist-Leninist ties, and show you the divisions now taking place, interestingly, within the Democrat Party over this. Because for some reason, they're kind of dividing the Democrats this time. Now look, to lay it out on the surface, pro-Gaza protesters are declaring an autonomous zone at different American universities. In some areas, they're claiming they're going to stay indefinitely. They're already being broken up in like NYU and Yale, but Columbia and so on looks like they're here to stay. There were several Jewish students and professors who were saying they're being attacked and blocked from accessing different parts of the campus. And as this unfolds, Democrat leaders are kind of having a difficult time on where to place themselves. Joe Biden, for example, came out just recently and said basically there's, fine people on both sides, kind of what Trump did with Charlottesville. There's some good and bad people on both sides. That's Biden's line with this. But look, as this unfolds, Democrat leaders are becoming increasingly divided over the issue. The Democrat Party risks losing the radical base within the Democrat socialist types who tend to be the grassroots of the party. Some of the more moderate Democrats, they're standing by Israel and they're supporting Israel, along with Biden for the most part, although again, he's still kind of divided on it. But many of the more radical types are actually standing with Gaza. Now, the issue does not bode well for Democrats going into the 2024 elections. You might remember, last time in 2020, it was BLM and Antifa who were rioting, and the division they were taking place within the public debate was more between Republicans and Democrats. But this time around, the issue of choice for the far left, and I'll explain what they are exactly, they're causing a rift within the Democrat Party itself. They're fracturing the Democrat Party. Now, I want to go deep into who these organizations really are, what's behind them, because again, a lot of them are Marxist organizations. A lot of them even have ties to the Chinese Communist Party. I'll show you the evidence for all this, folks. But let's start first with the surface picture. Let me lay out from the top, then we'll go deep into this, so stick with me. Now, this is from City News reporter Jessica Schwab and shows an undercover video from Columbia University. Now, it appears to be a protest leader raising concerns of so-called Zionists entering their camp. And so they form up a human chain to deny access to individuals they claim are Zionists. Watch this.
Attention, everyone. Can I get everyone to form a human chain right here, please? We have Zionists that have entered. Repeat after me. We have Zionists. Who have entered the camp. We are going to create a human chain. Where I am standing. So that they do not pass this point. And infringe upon our privacy. And try to disrupt our community.
Now, look, as the video goes on, the group leading this whole thing, they form a chain, then they push out the people they claim are Zionists. Watch this.
You see what you guys are doing to us?
We are going
You
to
see how hostile this
slowly
is? And you're asking me not to record?
walk and take a step forward.
Yeah, I absolutely feel threatened.
So that we can start to push them out of the camp. One step forward.
Now, it appears that even the university, Columbia in this case, has gotten on board with denying access to some areas based on where people stand on the issue. The pro-Israel professors and students seem to be denied access to the areas where the protests are. Now, normally, you could say that's kind of common practice with the way protests are run when police set up different zones. They try to keep the different groups separate, but this is complicated because the groups are race-based in this case. And so people are saying that because they're Jewish, they're not being allowed in the Muslim parts, or because they're Muslim, they're not being allowed in the Jewish parts. This is from Columbia University professor Shai Davidi, and he filmed himself being denied entry to the part of the campus where the pro-Gaza protesters have built a tent city, and he claims he's being denied access because he's Jewish. Let me show you a video on it from Visegrad 24.
They have deactivated. This is the sound of civil rights being denied of a Jewish professor. I want you all to remember this sign.
Did you get any prior notice
I did not get any prior notice. I emailed them and they wouldn't respond. I got an email 2 a.m. yesterday calling this a counter-protest, and I said, no, this is not a counter-protest. This is a Jewish professor who has the rights to be on campus, and you're denying him.
Now, again, I'm going to go deep into what's behind all this today, so stick with me. Sit-in protests like these are taking place at several of the so-called top universities in the United States. Columbia University, they're getting the most attention, but similar ones are being reported at MIT, Emerson College, Tufts University, NYU, which they arrested some of them last night, and many, many, many others. And even at the ones with arresting people, Yale, NYU, the protesters are just going to other places. They're like blocking roads and so on. The protesters had set up a camp at Yale again, but the camp got shut down. 45 of them were reportedly arrested, but Yale News reported right after that around 300 of them just moved spots. They had gone to block an intersection nearby instead. But there's even more to this, folks, because here's where things get really complicated and, frankly, a lot more interesting. The more radical side of the Democrat Party seems to be full in on this, and the more moderate ones are not. Pro-Gaza protesters are declaring autonomous zones at American universities, and the issue is now dividing Democrats of all people. Look, the more radical side of the Democrat Party seems to be full in on this, and I'll say right now, this could fracture the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party could be forced to divide into at least two parties because of this. Because the groups behind the Gaza side, most of them are DSA, Democrat Socialists of America, or tied in with the communist side, actual Marxist organizations. And unfortunately, there are several members of the Democrat Party who are on board with those guys. But a lot of the moderates don't go with that. Now, look, AOC Cortez, she gave a nod to the student protest during an event right alongside Joe Biden during an announcement yesterday at Biden's new climate corps. Watch this.
It is especially important that we remember the power of young people shaping this country today, of all days, as we once again witness the leadership of those peaceful student-led protests on campuses like Columbia, Yale, Berkeley, and many others.
Peaceful.
Look, she doesn't say exactly what the protests are she's referring to, but the only big protests happening at the campuses that she names are the pro-Gaza ones. But remember, this is how all of this fits in. This was not a one-time thing. AOC and a few others on the radical side of the Democrats, you know, the
Communist
so-called
Party
squad,
of
they got called out
United
recently
States
for
of
refusing
America.
to condemn things like, you know, burning the American flag or chanting death to America. Daily Fetch said that Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and numerous House Democrats in the nation's capital refused to condemn burning the American flag and chanting death to America when pressed by a reporter. The reporter's questions came in response to a pro-Palestinian demonstration on the Brooklyn Bridge in New York City where American flags were burned. And this was not the first time either. Remember, folks, Representative Rashida Tlaib has been one of the leading politicians behind the pro-Gaza protests. She's Palestinian herself, right? Including the one with the recent takeover of a building on Capitol grounds with the protesters. They literally took over part of a Capitol building, similar to Jan 6. And you might remember Marjorie Taylor Greene was asking for them to be prosecuted the same way the J6ers were. Now look, when Rashida Tlaib was asked to condemn these chants and so on, this was her response.
At a rally in your district, people were chanting death to America. Do you condemn?
Talk to Fox News.
But do you condemn chants of death to America?
I don't talk to people that use racist tropes.
Now that chant has been relatively common among the protesters. Here was one where a group in Chicago learned the Farsi chant for death to Israel and death to America.
Bar, bar, Israel! Bar, bar, Israel! Thank you.
So, it has two meanings, depending on who it is. It can mean death to or down with. So, we can get a mark bar America? We can get a mark bar America. Yes, we can. Mark bar America! Mark bar America! Mark bar America! Mark bar America!
Now, it turns out that little chant you just watched, that's not some random group. They're tied in with the Chicago mayor. Daily Signal notes this: Chicago Alderman Byron Sicho Lopez, a member of the mayor's leadership team, headlined an event Saturday where some participants chanted "Death to America" and plotted ways, get this, folks, to disrupt the summer's Democratic National Convention in the city. Again, for some weird reason, these far-left groups are going after the Democrats. I'll be explaining why this is, but hear me out. Now, further in, it notes that this Lopez guy, he's a member of the Democratic Socialist Caucus of the Chicago City Council. He was first elected in 2019 to represent the 25th Ward, and it notes that a fellow member of the Democratic Socialist Caucus, and get used to hearing that because they represent the far left within the Democrat Party, and they're the main force behind a lot of what we're watching on the surface. A fellow member, Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor, made headlines on her own last week. Taylor accused the Chicago Fire Department of making race-based decisions when administering tests to firefighters and distributing equipment. They're behind a lot of the far-left movements happening around the United States. And the last part is one of the bigger issues here. Most of the main groups pushing the pro-Gaza protests are with socialist or outright Marxist organizations. Some of them have ties to the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, the main ones do. It's a lot of the same groups that were actually behind the Black Lives Matter protests and the other big protests all around the United States. And remember, many of the squad members, AOC, Taliba, Rashid, all these people, they're also tied in with this. And they represent the more extreme left of the Democrat Party. Also tied in with groups like Democratic Socialists of America, like George Soros. Bill Gates even comes up in some of the documents. And a lot of the Democrat grassroots is tied in with these groups and similar ones in various ways, which means this is going to cause a rift with them. And there's some reason why these far-left groups are trying to divide the Democrats now, interestingly. I think there's something more to this. Now, let me explain. Remember, this came up when the protests began not long after the October 7 terrorist attacks against Israel. When these groups began, these Marxist groups, and they're actually, a lot of them are openly Marxist, when these groups that were behind BLM, these groups that are behind the Squad, these groups being financed by George Soros and other main figures like this, these groups with ties to the Chinese Communist Party, these Marxist groups in the United States, when they began these protests, it was not about genocide in Palestine. It was not about that. They were actually originally coming out in support of Hamas for the terror attacks. Remember, the protests started before Israel launched a counterattack. These groups were supporting Hamas immediately following the attack. And the groups also used to put their names of their organizations on their signs. They used to write it. I don't see them doing that as much anymore. The same basic signs designed for these things are the same designs that were used for Black Lives Matter and other protests these groups have been behind. They are socialist and Marxist organizations. Let me show you a reminder. This is from October last year, just a couple days after the Hamas terror attacks. And remember also, this caused an immediate rift within the Democrat Party. Why, you might ask? Well, because there are a lot of Democrat leaders who are affiliated with Democratic Socialists of America, one of the groups tied with this. Times of Israel noted in October of 2023, right after the terror attacks, this. They said, the Progressive Democratic Socialists of America organization was harshly condemned by other U.S. Democrats on Sunday for backing a New York City rally in support of Saturday's Palestinian terror onslaught against Israelis. Organizers billed the rally as supporting the Palestinian quote-unquote right to resist. Shortly after, Gaza terrorists slaughtered many hundreds of Israeli citizens in a surprise attack. It notes that the New York branch, and this is going to be really important, so remember the New York branch of this because this is where some of the other big stuff comes in. But first this. It says the New York branch of the Democratic Socialists of America advertised the event and expressed, quote, solidarity with the Palestinian people and their right to resist. Further in, it notes that the U.S. Congress members affiliated with or supportive of the organization did not respond to requests for comment about the protest, including Representative Jamal Bowman, U.S. Representative Cori Bush, U.S. Representative Greg Cesar, and U.S. Representative Rashida Tlaib. People tied in with
Looks
that.
like somebody needs to leave.
Basically, folks, another of the main groups behind all of this, and this is a big one, it's called the Party for Socialism and Liberation. And there's a pretty complex web that ties many of these surface groups together in a similar network. On the surface, a lot of these organizations, they have names like, it's not like the pro-Gaza or pro-Muslim or whatever else. But if you look at the money behind them, they're part of this same infrastructure. Now, on the note of this group, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, here's what the ADL says about it. They say the Party for Socialism and Liberation is a communist party active in the United States, founded in 2004 after splintering from the Workers' World Party. The PSL is based in San Francisco. They believe, quote, the only solution to the deepening crisis of capitalism is the socialist transformation of society. And, quote, the socialist government will approach the peoples of the world on the principles of international working class solidarity. They are communists. Now, keep in mind that the Workers' World Party and the Party for Socialism and Liberation are also pro-Chinese Communist Party organizations, meaning they support the CCP, including, Interestingly, the CCP's genocide against Muslims, the actual genocide against Muslims, which makes you question, well, what do they actually believe in, right? If they're claiming that they don't like Israel because of a so-called genocide against Palestinians, why do they not condemn and they actually even support the CCP's genocide and actual genocide of Muslim Uyghurs? Makes you really wonder, right? Now, these are communist organizations. Add in groups like Democratic Socialists of America, and then you have the core of much of the radical factions that form the Democrat Party's grassroots. A pro-Gaza takeover is happening right now in campuses all across the United States, and we should follow the money because the cash behind the scenes propping up these protests ties in with this whole network as well. It is a nexus of communist organizations tied in with the Chinese Communist Party, the grassroots radicals within the Democratic Party, and also
and
two
within
interesting
Russia.
terrorist groups. The New York Post notes, the pro-Palestinian protests, and this is from November 2023, they say the pro-Palestinian protests over the last month, remember this is 1 month after the attacks in Israel took place, where tens of thousands in the U.S. have chanted for the end of Israel, are not merely a story of organic rage. They are also funded in large part by an uber-wealthy American-born tech entrepreneur, Neville Roy Singham, and his wife, Jody Evans. It notes that since 2017, Singham has been the main funder of the People's Forum, which has co-organized at least 4 protests after 1,200 innocent Israelis were slaughtered by Hamas on October 7th. Keep in mind, folks, this was from November of 2023, before Israel launched its full-scale assault on Gaza. This was not about that. This was them actually standing behind the Palestinians in the attack on Israel. Now, by this time, within that 1 month, this individual was behind the money for 4 protests openly supporting Hamas. But a review of public disclosure documents, it says, again, this is from New York Post, a review of public disclosure form shows that multi-millionaire Singham and his wife Evans have donated over $20.4 million to the People's Forum from 2017 to 2022 through a series of shell organizations and donor advisory groups, accounting for nearly all of the group's funding. He's also a China sympathizer, and guess where he lives? He lives in Shanghai, in China. And he has ties, it says, to at least 4 propaganda news sites that boost the Chinese Communist Party's image abroad. The Times reporting. And notes further in, these Chinese media interests, CCP folks, are helping sow discord in the U.S. representative in the U.S. This is according to Representative Mike Gallagher, chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, telling the Free Press. Now, here's a bit more on the People's Forum, the group that was behind the protests and organizations around this, and also to its ties to the Chinese Communist Party. Washington Examiner notes, again, this is from November of 2023, shortly after the attacks in Israel. It says the People's Forum, which dubs itself a movement incubator for working class and marginalized communities to build unity across historic lines of division at home and abroad, is co-leading a Shut It Down for Palestine event Thursday in Manhattan and marched in Washington, D.C. last Saturday with tens of thousands of protesters boosting Hamas, whose October 7 attack against a Jewish state have since killed more than 1,400 Israelis. Remember, this article is from November last year, 1 month after the attacks. And notes that the same charity, this People's Forum, hosts events and entities downplaying China's genocide against ethnic Uyghurs. These are the Muslims in China who the CCP has an actual designated genocide against. And notes it has pocketed millions of dollars combined from groups tied to a reported Chinese propaganda influence operation, according to tax forms reviewed by the Washington Examiner. It notes, the People's Forum leading involvement in the pro-Palestinian movement amid the bloody Middle East conflict further underscores how China, CCP, linked organizations are sowing discord in the U.S., while officials in China, Russia, and Iran leveraged social media to proliferate disinformation in connection to the war. Meaning, folks, a CCP-tied Marxist organization was the main group organizing these protests. One of them, at least, right? One of the main ones. Well,